I'm Rob Forsyth, and this is Liberalism in Question, a series of podcasts from us here at the CIS, looking into issues around classical liberalism, the philosophy of the CIS, its strengths, its weaknesses, its challenges, its opponents, what's good about it and what needs to be reformed. I'm delighted to say that my guest today is Nicholas Eberstadt. Nicholas is the Henry Wendt Chair in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute in the United States. He's written widely in areas of democracy, demography I should say, and surprisingly he's also an expert on North Korea. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you.
How come a man is an expert on democracy in the world and North Korea?
I don't know that there is anybody who's an expert on North Korea, which means that you really can't be falsified if you make wild claims about this fascinating country.
Well, I thought we should talk about North Korea because our theme, as you know, in this podcast is liberalism, and I think we've got the most illiberal country in the world. Would that be fair?
I think the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, I think North Korea is state of the art. I don't know who the second best is, but I think they're state of the art, illiberal.
I suspect, certainly I, and I suspect many of my viewers and listeners, only have a very vague idea about. We see occasional marches on TV. We see Kim JongIl laughing at a rocket shoot or something. We know almost nothing about it. Firstly, tell me about the country.
North Korea is a project. North Korea is an experiment of a certain sort. It is at war with all of liberal modernity. It is a project to collect a race of people, and they unashamedly use the word race, their word is Minchok, to collect a race of people under the leadership of a single family. This would be the Kim family of Pyongyang, now in their third generation of ruler up in the north, and to stand up to the big powers around them under what they would call independent socialism, which I think would mean to us under a system that is not compromised by the market, and which gives supreme power and unquestioned power to the chief of the entire program.
How on earth did someone come up with this idea?
It's an interesting story, and it's hard to find a really good account of it. It started almost as an accident because the Korean peninsula was partitioned through an accident right at the end of the Second World War.
It was firstly controlled by the Russians for a while, am I right? Then the Japanese.
The Japanese had colonized the Korean peninsula, and after the surrender of Japan, the US and the Soviet governments agreed that they would temporarily process the return of surrendering Japanese soldiers in the northern zone and the southern zone of Korea. This is all supposed to be temporary. And the person whom the Soviets chose as their temporary figurehead for the North was this young soldier named Kim Il-sung. One thing led to another, and he became their guy for putting a permanent Soviet zone in the north. Then he became the architect of this surprise attack against the South, which is now known as the Korean War. It was never fully settled. We're only in a ceasefire now, believe it or not. And then this man from Stalin did something very surprising. He got rid of Stalin died, and he got rid of the Soviet hand and became a really genuinely independent
This is
dictator.
Kim Il-sung.
This is Kim Il-sung. Yeah. He then started playing a very effective game of Kremlin against Beijing, getting aid from both, giving allegiance to neither, and developing his own cult of personality, which would actually have made Stalin blush. threw away, over the course of this project, threw away Marx, threw away Lenin, found that there was something much more durable and something that garnered obedience much better than Marxism-Leninism, which was just pure, old-fashioned racial nationalism. I wouldn't call his philosophy of Juche or his 10 principles, I wouldn't call it national socialism, because that phrase has already been dibsed by somebody else, but call it racial socialism. And then took the Soviet original repression apparatus and perfected it for an Asian society. So whereas you would go to the Gulag in the Soviet Union for some infraction, real or imagined, in North Korea, if you got in trouble, it wouldn't be just you who'd go to the Gulag. It would be your wife, it would be your children, it would be your uncles and aunts, it would be the family. It was family values.
They're even anti-individualism in the way they punish people.
Exactly. Exactly, but it was very, very well adapted to repression for an Asian sensibility. The basic idea was to make sure that there was no room for any private thought, any private activity, much less any sort of resistance to the family that was going to be the ruling structure. And that's where the 10 principles come in. They threw out all of the Marx and Lenin with the idea where you'd have a rotation of dictators. This was going to be a family business.
Is there a goal? I mean, Marxist, I don't know about Leninism, but Marxism has in theory a goal, a perfect society when humans are set free, man is set free and reborn. It's, in my view, very dangerous for that very reason. I find such perfectionist projects very dangerous. But is there some goal with all this purpose?
Yes.
With all this project?
Yes.
And what is it?
The goal is, it's a secular religion. The goal is to create an Elysium on earth. And the Elysium are the happy, reunited race of Korean people under the tender leadership of the Kim family. And so at the moment, we're in the sort of the secular Moses portion of this program, where the Kim family is trying to gather the South Koreans out from under the pharaonic oppression of the imperialists. That would be me and my mates back in the United States, but yours too. And I think the what they would call the Japanese bastards would also be part of it. It's there's quite a crew of people that they have problems with. Once the race is reunified, once the people are gathered under the tender care of the independent socialist state, then you have paradise on earth.
And they believe that?
Well,
wow.
Look at it this way, Robert. I mean, the Soviet Union went into the dustbin over 30 years ago. The satellite states did as well. China is something, but it's not still exactly a Marxist-Leninist state. These boys are still running strong.
Well, let me ask that question again, because did Kim Il-sung actually believe he was helping others, or is this a cynical, egotistical power play, or is there a genuine belief that somehow or other he is really helping others?
Well, I would say that he can make the argument of benevolence through his propaganda.
Well, that's all he does, as I understand it, yes.
But the focus is the hatred and the animosity towards the racial enemies. The racial enemies would be Japan, the United States, of course. China isn't often mentioned, but if you scratch at it a little bit, you find that China is also not in the category of best buddies forever. And the Russians. So there are no permanent friends among the people who are not of the ethnicity.
And
so it's a permanent war situation.
Permanent, yes, and it's a bit like 1984 reminds me of it, you see, rather strange. I had not known it was so racially based. This is quite new to me. I suspect to many people watching. This makes it quite distinct as a racial-based autocracy like this.
Well, there are bits and pieces of it which can be traced back to the militarist era in Japan. And actually, the Juche word, which is associated with this way of thinking, has a antecedent in fascist or militarist Japan. So it's not entirely sui generis, but they took this and ran with it in a way that no other modern state has.
Is there a sense in which if you're a Korean, you're sort of in the wrong place? You've got Japan to the east, you've got China and Russia to the west, you're going to find yourself as a people constantly fighting for existence. Is this what's led perhaps this incredible racial chauvinism? The fact that they have been so powerless, as it were, in the last hundreds of years.
Well, they have, it is a highly imperfect analogy, but if I were to mention the word Ireland, let's say, yep. The Korean tradition is alive to the memory of grievance, let's say. And I'm not sure that there is any grievance that has been forgotten historically in the North Korean panoply that we're discussing here.
But that comes out of powerlessness, it doesn't, in a sense, right? The fact you've not ever won. I think the Irish matters now, Ireland today has way moved on because they're now become a prosperous country. Yeah. But when Ireland was finding itself under the English or the British imperialists or colonialists and so forth, you can imagine the nursing of grievances. It comes out of a sense of powerlessness. So and then you get power suddenly, bang.
Well, so this is where the North Korean tradition, kind of like hits modernity, because how does a state like this amass the power to achieve this ambition? First of all, they have to have absolute and total control over their own subjects in order to amass the international power that they're going to try to extend. They also have to make sure that there is no room for debate or alternative thought. And part of the way to assure this, part of the control system, was again to turn Marx on his head. Instead of going to a classless society, Kim Il-sung and his descendants structured and enforced a 50-plus stratum system, which is called Songbun. And depending upon where you had the good fortune or the misfortune to be born, you were either the descendant of a revolutionary martyr and up very near the top, or you are the descendant of a collaborator bastard with the Americans or the Japanese and very far at the bottom, or you're the descendant of a Christian and then you're really in trouble. And so they have this stratified society which helps to prevent and really almost eliminate the possibilities for any of the basic human rights that we take as kind of desiderata.
If I'm living in the Democratic Republic,
yeah. It's great, isn't it?
It's a great line, of North Korea, and I have a problem, and I'm going to express that problem. I'm worried about complaint. What's going to happen to me? How does it work in practice, in other words?
Well, to some degree, it depends upon your station in this super classized society. If you are at the bottom, you can be treated very, very roughly. And because the economy has performed so terribly badly, even if you were treated rather poorly, it's going to be very hard for you to get the food that you need to survive, be extinguished. If you're somewhere in the somewhere above that, your opportunities for opportunities for work, your opportunities for education, your family's opportunities are going to be eliminated. If you've done something that they're quite cross with, you're going to go to one of the punishment camps, and you may survive the punishment camp. You may not survive the punishment camp, but if you go there, that's going to be a catastrophe for your entire family. And this has turned out to be one of the brilliant tweaks on Stalinism that the regime enforced, because family is so important in the Korean tradition that threatening your family line is a way of enforcing obedience and conformism.
I'm speaking with Nicholas Eberstadt, who's both a world interested demographer, but also, we're finding out, a man with particular interest in the Democratic Republic of Korea. Not called North Korea, is it? They call themselves Korea.
They would call themselves, they would say that all of Korea belongs to them.
Of course.
Yeah, but at the moment they're in the northern portion of Korea, and they have just recently, as of last year, said that they are not the same race as the South, in a very interesting inversion. I've wondered about that a great deal. Why did they suddenly come up with such a strange 180 on their doctrine? This may not be the correct reason, but if you were to use nuclear weapons on a population of your compatriots, you might think that this was a very naughty thing to do. If you say that the people next door to you are no longer compatriots, you could justify some.
I was hoping that they were giving up the notion of reuniting the peninsula under the Kim family, but no.
Well, Kim Jong-un made it very clear in this slightly acrobatic disquisition on why it's no longer the same Minjok anymore. He made it very clear that if they in the South did anything wrong, the North would have to react and might have to invade them and might have to occupy and absorb them. So we get to the same place, but with even less mercy.
Right. Now you've described a tight top. It strikes me there's no place to move in this society. It's such a tight autocracy. Is there any space at all? Are there any dissidents anywhere? That we know of, I should say.
Not if the government is aware of them first. If the government is aware of them first, they're not there anymore.
Well, let me ask, you mentioned Christians, which is a personal interest to me. Are there Christians in North Korea?
It depends what you mean by Christian. I don't think what you mean by Christian or what I mean by Christian. Half a lifetime ago, I visited Pyongyang, and I went to worship. I went to a Christian church there, but it's a puppet church. It's a what do we call it? It's a cash cow, really. It's a Potemkin place with Bibles that are handed out to the parishioners at the beginning of the service and taken away at the end. And it was a sort of a little touristic spot, which they were able to get money from foreigners.
You use the word Potemkin from the famous Potemkin villages that the Soviets put up, looking like a set in an American Western, just the front and all the rest not there. So they put on a display at that stage when they thought it was necessary to do so, I take it. But actual believers, you think there are very few and far between?
I think if you were a genuine, God-fearing, independent Christian, you wouldn't have much of a chance there.
Wow. Now, is the official theology of the state atheist then?
Is
atheist?
Well, they regard the Kim dynasty as a sort of living gods. So
this is my question. Is there some transcendent authority? Is there the mandate of heaven? Is there some sense in which why the Kim family? Why is it not just arbitrary?
Well, they would say that. They do say, not they would say, but they do say that Kim Il-sung and Kim JongIl, the grandfather and the father, are in heaven looking down.
Really?
It's the metaphysics is a little bit hit and miss, but it's the thought that counts.
In history, there have been many societies with no real clear metaphysics. The ancient Greek and Roman gods were confusing. Shinto in Japan, again, there's no theology as it is in the West. So, but nonetheless, there is a belief in a transcendent in some way. but which is backing the Kim family, the Kim dynasty.
Oh, everything has a purpose, and the purpose is all securing the power of the state through the agency of the Kim family. The state and the family are fused in a way that's really hard to imagine in a society like ours.
I'm finding it hard to imagine in any society why I think that particular family would somehow be the future of the nation, the heart of the nation, not based upon their abilities, not based upon any other processes. It's just there they are.
One of the songs, without you, the Kim family, there is no us.
Well, now
without you, there is no us.
You can't answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do the Koreans believe this?
Isn't that the critical question? People have to get to be very good actors and very good liars under a system of almost perfect repression. And so when people weep in the streets after this awful, wicked man, Kim Jong-il, who's not just a terrible man, but a very bad ruler, after he passes away, these kind of paroxysms of sorrow. How much of that is acting? How much of that is strategic lying for survival? How much of that is I can't tell which I'm doing? The longer a system like the DPRK is in power, the more I would assume people start to become inured to the big lie that it's all based on. But that's my liberal outside perspective.
I mean, do they have teenagers in the Democratic Republic of Korea?
Indeed they do. Indeed they do. So where are the authority where are the authority problems, right?
Well, I'm just wondering, do they have the sort of thing we have?
Where are the authority problems? You get into the army at age 16 or 17 and you stay there for 10 years. And
I guess while there's an enemy, you can externalize the anxieties. While you can hate the Americans there's a sense in which that's where you put your energy rather than within. Would that be a fair way of understanding how a totalitarian?
Well,
again, I'm relying on my knowledge of George
Orwell.
Orwell.
Sure. No, but that would be one of the ways that you make a formula like this continue to function from one year to the next. I mean, we have to ask how does a project like this continue for more than 22 minutes?
This is my exact question, and I expect many watching thinking, how could this be?
Well, I mean, if you go back a long way, and you mentioned the Greeks. If you go back to a time in our own tradition when monetary rewards weren't the main way of motivating and influencing people, when people were influenced by the ideas of glory or the idea of
glory and honor, yes.
After a fashion, the North Korean propaganda has its own entire retinue of it.
Reading the 10 principles, which are the most boring thing I've read for quite a while, I must say, because they're all the same principle over again about the Kim family.
Yes.
I notice a language of honor and of dignity coming out, as if that's what they're appealing to.
Yes. Well, and part of it is that, I mean, the project has been economic failure, obviously. The project is a human rights disaster. But they want to make the case that they are the authentic and genuine Korean people, and those in the South are defiled and rotten and compromised. And they may have blandishments, they may have
Samsung and Hyundai.
Yeah, tiny little blandishments, but in their heart, in their soul, they are not really Korean people. They're sellouts, and they're.
I'm asking another question I've asked before another way.
Yeah.
Would the Democratic Republic of Korea not work as well if there wasn't a South Korea, if there wasn't a doppelganger, an evil twin, as it were, to the South?
That's a very probing question, Robert, and I think in a way you're absolutely right, because what would happen? What happens when? Yeah,
God forbid.
Exactly.
God forbid.
Exactly. What happens when the dog catches the car?
Yes, exactly.
And then I think what happens is moving on to the next enemy project, which is.
But still, there's not the question of finding what's Korean, though. That no longer would work. Go back to a question, you made a comment about economics. In Korea, there's no market, there's no price mechanism. It's all done from the top down, is that right? It's bureaucratically run?
The intention is to do so, except when the intention leads to the abyss of absolute catastrophe. And then as a pragmatic matter, the regime will step back and allow market forces to rescue people from the population from starvation or whatever the other problem they've caused will be. But as a approach and a principle, the government wishes to have no market forces at all.
In our country, people often justify government invention on the grounds of market failure. Here we have market involved because of government failure.
Yeah, exactly right.
But it should mean the decisions on the whole are second-rate decisions. If you just simply can't make that world decisions, a complicated economic world, if it's being centralised, it's going to mean bad decisions.
Well, it's even worse.
Is that right?
It's even worse than that, Robert, because think of it this way. When Hayek and Mises were arguing about the socialist cost question and the socialist pricing questions, there were at least Oscar Lange had the idea that there'd be a lot of information out there, and the planners could use the information. The North Korean regime has suppressed all statistics and all data, and so they're not just planning without figures, they're planning without plans.
Because you don't want to have bad news, right? If I'm running my factory, I'm going to give good news, nothing else but good news. Yeah. Even though.
Yeah. So think of the scale of waste, inefficiency, and economic disaster. Well, you can see the scale. Look at the satellite photos of the Korean Peninsula. There's this great big dark thing up at the top.
And yet they've got rockets.
Yes.
They cheer their rockets.
Yes, they've got. Because, among other things, they're populated by Koreans. And Korean people are enterprising and smart, and they work hard. They're just tasked on a very different project from the one that we appreciate.
I really should have asked, why on earth are you so interested in Korea? I should have asked it at the beginning, I know. Yeah. What possessed you to be so interested in this country?
I've often asked myself that question. I was a hard left communist sympathizer back in early university days, and I became an anti-communist after a couple of years, before I got to graduate school. In graduate school, this was the Cold War era, I thought I wanted to do a study on comparison of economic performance of a communist system and a non-communist system. Well, the natural experiment.
Yes, exactly.
In the Korean Peninsula.
Great idea.
So it was a wonderful idea for a thesis, except there were two tiny little problems. One problem was that there were no available, honest, independent data about North Korea's performance, because they wouldn't let anything out unless they had improved it first. And the second was, back in those days, the ROK hadn't yet become.
But South Korea was an autocracy itself in its own way.
And even in South Korea in those days, they had slander against the state strictures on the books. So if you, in theory, if you went to a researcher in South Korea and he told you something that was defamatory in the view of the government, he could get in a lot of trouble. And so there was a certain amount of misinformation about the South as well. So if I had any common sense, I would have looked at this situation and packed my bag and gone someplace to do something easier, but I was kind of a stubborn fellow.
I'm glad you haven't. By the way, that looking back now, that experiment controlled for culture in the broader sense, they're both Koreans,
Yep.
both before 1947, 48,
Yep.
similar history.
Yep.
How would you say the experiments run now that you can look at it at this distance?
Well, I think you can see it yourself, Robert. It's a tragic experiment because the northern half of the country was subjected to the most exquisitely perfect illiberalism that I think humanity has yet experienced, almost as perfectly totalitarian as a society run by human beings is able to achieve. And in the South, after a lot of twists and turns and heartache, the society and the population stumbled towards constitutional democracy, basically open economy, and they've thrived. They've become extraordinarily successful and wealthy as a society.
You must feel for the individuals living in North Korea because they could also thrive if only this terrible regime and the idea behind it wasn't there. It seems a human tragedy. It's all for nothing, really.
About 20 years ago, with some other colleagues, I helped to establish something called the HRNK, the U.S. Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. It's a research organization that advocates human rights, but it does so by putting out studies explaining and revealing the realities of life in the North. So, I mean, that's the best that someone like I can do.
My last question, and I do thank you so much, but it's when I thought, I'll ask about North Korea, I know almost nothing about it, this won't be that interesting. It's been fascinating. I don't know why, maybe it's helpful to think about not just liberalism, but it's the alternative, to see what, suddenly liberalism looks not as bad as it may have looked, because it does have its issues and challenges. My question is this, do you have any hope for the future of North Korea? I don't mean in your lifetime, forgive me, nor in mine, but in 100 years' time, when my successor sitting down here doing another Liberalism in Question, I'm sure the program will be running still in 100 years' time, will he have a better story to hear?
Oh, I think very clearly there'll be a better story to hear. This experiment is a tremendous success for the Kim family. It's a terrible tragedy for almost everybody else in the peninsula. It won't go on forever. And eventually, I think there's going to be a coming together of the Korean population. Because it's been separated for so long, it's going to be more difficult than the German reunification. It's going to be more difficult than the American reunification, which you'll recall occurred after the end of the Civil War.
Some say that's still going on, actually.
I've heard that too. But the spark of liberalism and the spark of freedom does exist in the Korean peninsula, and I think that the love and compassion in the South for Koreans in the North is eventually going to make for a healing process in the entire peninsula. And as that implies, I think it's going to be a process that's led by the open society, not by the dictatorship.
Well, Nicholas Eberstadt, thank you very much. And we hope, and those who pray that you're actually right. This has been another of our edition of Liberalism in Question. Today I've been talking with Nicholas Eberstadt about the most liberal society in the world. I'm Rob Forsyth. Thank you for watching.